The big story that we are tracking, of course, comes by the way of that subsidized Bharat Rice, which will now be given to people or made available to people at 29 rupees a kg. This, of course, on the back of the fact that retail prices of grains have soared about 15% in last 1 year alone.
Absolutely. So, Shweta, I think multiple, dimensions to this story. The first dimension obviously being that we are in the thick of election season. And this is something, food inflation is something that impacts everybody across states, across castes, and not just the traditional caste, even the caste that Modi is now going after. So obviously inflation is something, food inflation is something that bites everybody, right? So it is election season, you've got to contain food price inflation, and one way of doing that is to subsidize rice. I think the second headline I'm reading into the story is this very subtle way of promoting brand Bharat. It started with Bharat Atta, it started with Bharat Chana, now it is Bharat Rice. So at some level, it's not India Rice, it's not India Atta, it's not India Chana. So at some level, I think a very, very seamless inception of the term Bharat in common usage, in retail usage, giving it absolute recall value. And then, of course, the last is the fact that we don't know how food inflation is going to pan out over the next 3 months, 4 months or so. So it's not just elections. I think at the end of the day, the government is responsible to make sure that the bottom of the pyramid, those who don't have access to excessive funds, are able to at least have their 3 square meals a day. And in that light, it is a very subsequent, natural, obvious progression from Bharat Atta, Bharat Chana to now Bharat Rice. Now, at 29 rupees a kg, it is actually almost half the price of what rice is retailed at. Now, what the government is also saying is that about 5% in every 1 kg pack, in fact, is going to be sold in denominations of 5 kgs and 10 kgs, but in every 1 kg, about 5% is going to be the broken rice. So, the broken rice does not find a lucrative market outside of the subsidy regime. And hence, it makes sense for the government to ensure that the grains are not getting wasted. Some of those grains, at least 5% of them, are getting utilized in this and getting packaged at 29 rupees is going to be available across all ration shops, which are the subsidized ration shops, also known as the Kendriya Bhandar. And yeah, Piyush Goyal launched this yesterday, and here we are, 29 rupees a kg for Bharat Rice.
Okay, and I see 2 debates emanating from this. One, of course, is the fact that government has rolled out another subsidy. So look, another subsidy for another commodity. The second, of course, is the continuing rising prices of grain and pulses over the year. And the government has tried its best to contain that. Some of it is in government's control, which is by the way of subsidy. Others, of course, are climatic conditions that government cannot control. So this perhaps is the right time, just ahead of elections, to tame some of those prices.
Absolutely. Like I said, I think, inflation is something that the government does not in its fiscal policy have control over. But what it does have control over are the expenses it wants to mete out in a bid to get people to have affordable food grains available. So it is obviously adding to the government's expenditure. This is not capital expenditure. This is consumption expenditure, which is actually going to get consumed. People buy it. That money, subsidy, goes straight into the hands of the people. So at one level, the government is increasing its own expenditure. Was this planned? Was this factored in when the government revised the fiscal deficit target to 5.8% from 5.9% for this year? And remember, April onwards, we are into the new financial year. So the 5.1% fiscal deficit target across, let's say, 500,000 tons of rice, which the government is going to procure. And then that is going to be distributed through NABARD and NCCF. So overall, I'm sure the government would have budgeted for subsidies. Is this specifically budgeted while accounting for fiscal deficit? We don't know. But at one level, yeah, you are looking at fulfilling your obligation as the government of India, elections or no elections, to make sure that, people don't go hungry. But then there are other schemes also which the government has dished out pre-budget, pre-election season, which are in the form of, in any case, free ration to 80 crore Indians. So there is already one expense which the government is incurring on 80 crore people. Now there is already subsidy on atta, there is subsidy, and wheat inflation honestly has been contained. So according to Piyush Goyal yesterday at the launch of Bharat Rice, he said that for the last 6 months, wheat inflation has been 0. I don't know, we'll have to cross-check that data, is it across the board or not, but that is something that he has said himself, that the government has been able to contain at least retail prices of atta at, for the last 6 months. So now rice is another cost which the government will have
rice
to
is a very interesting commodity, because India did impose restrictions on the export of non-basmati white rice, post which the stocks in India, the buffer stocks, were at an all-time high. The government did try to sell that through open market sale, but there wasn't much pickup in the bulk stock. So retailing rice at this point seems like the obvious move so that the rice doesn't get wasted.
Yeah, but there is obviously another problem which the exporters will continue to face, and which is that if the bulk of the procurement is happening from within India, and if the government bodies, the collection bodies which are part of the government are procuring this, perhaps at some very hard negotiations and at a very, very competitive price, then with these export restrictions which had been put in place, a larger dollar revenue for the export market takes a beating, which again is not great for India's overall GDP growth, because net exports or net imports, as the case may be, is a factor which goes into calculation of GDP.
So perhaps time to relook at that ban.
So I'm pretty sure
that
at least until elections, the government will be a little less concerned about headline GDP growth, will be more concerned about headline inflation. So I think food inflation is something that the government wants to go after, even though overall inflation is not a lookout for the fiscal policy, it's a lookout for the monetary policy. And tomorrow is the big decision which will be announced on whether we are going to see any rate cut or not. Some analysts saying that we might see a 10 basis point cut just to gauge momentum, just to see how the yield should pan out from here, test the waters. But yeah, overall I think inflation needs to be the RBI's concern. But given we are in election season, given we are talking specifically about food inflation and a large vote bank, in fact 100% of the vote bank is dependent on eating food. So these subsidies are not going to go anywhere, and if anything we might see more and more subsidies getting added.
Of course, and this is not new for the government to try and give relief to consumers by the way of tinkering of fiscal policy. Monetary policy of course is not in government's control. RBI is expected to weigh in on that tomorrow. We'll bring all those details for you here on Newsline.